Have you ever looked around and wondered why your life feels borrowed? As if every choice, every word, every smile you give belongs more to others than to yourself? Maybe you've nodded in rooms where your silence was mistaken for agreement, where your dreams were shelved for the comfort of the group. It's subtle, this quiet theft of identity. You wear clothes that fit someone else's expectations. You speak in tones shaped by unspoken rules. And somewhere beneath the surface, a voice, yours, aches to breathe. We are taught to belong, to blend in, to comply. But what if belonging is the very thing keeping you from becoming who you truly are? What if comfort is a prison padded with applause and tradition? To abandon the herd is not to rebel, it is to return. To return to the raw, unfiltered self buried beneath layers of borrowed fear. But don't mistake this path for glory. It begins not with cheers, but with silence. Not with light, but with shadow. Because real freedom doesn't welcome you. It strips you bare and asks, are you ready to walk alone? Most people aren't living, they're merely drifting. Not because they're lazy or incapable, but because they were handed a script too early. From childhood, we are taught that safety is the ultimate virtue. Blend in, obey, be agreeable. Smile even when your soul rebels. At first, it feels comfortable. There's a rhythm, a structure, and an invisible promise. If you stay inside the lines, you will be protected. But what they don't tell you is that this comfort is a clever disguise for stagnation. It keeps you from asking difficult questions, from taking uncomfortable risks, from meeting the unknown parts of yourself. The herd offers a false sense of calm, rules to follow, roles to play, and rewards for compliance. But inside, a quiet erosion begins. Not of your body, but of your identity. Over time, something strange happens. You find yourself smiling at things you don't believe, laughing when it feels empty, agreeing to plans that drain you. And slowly, your intuition starts to fade. You no longer know what you want, only what you should want. Your own desires feel foreign, as if they belong to someone else. The herd never needed your uniqueness, it only required your obedience. There's a strange hollowness in collective approval. It fills your calendar but starves your soul. The more you conform, the less you recognize your reflection. You become a blurred version of yourself, shaped not by inner truth, but by external demand. And perhaps the worst part is, you might not even notice the loss. The numbness becomes normal. Yet sometimes, something inside stirs. A moment of silence, a sudden feeling of misplacement, a dream that won't go away. These are not mistakes. They are signals, not of rebellion, but of awakening. They whisper the truth the herd hopes you'll never hear. That comfort is not the same as fulfillment, and safety is not the same as purpose. To see this illusion for what it is takes courage. To admit that the life you've built isn't truly yours can be terrifying. But it's also the first step toward freedom. Not the polished kind you see in books or speeches, but the raw, trembling kind that asks you to step away from everything familiar and walk into the unknown. That is where real life begins. It starts small. You laugh at a joke that makes you uncomfortable. You say yes to something you don't want. You mimic the gestures of those around you to avoid seeming strange. One day you look in the mirror, and though your face is familiar, there's something missing behind the eyes. You've become an actor in a play written by others. Society praises conformity with gentle words, maturity, politeness, balance. But beneath the surface, these virtues can become weapons. Not all obedience is virtuous. Sometimes it's just the silence of someone too afraid to be seen. You dress for approval. You speak to avoid offense. You avoid topics that might stir discomfort, even when your heart is screaming to speak. There is a kind of violence in this quiet obedience, not the loud, dramatic kind, but a steady erosion. Every time you suppress your truth to fit in, something fragile within you cracks. The herd doesn't demand your blood, it demands your authenticity. And in return, it gives you applause. But applause is cheap when it costs your soul. Most people live their entire lives pretending they are not pretending. They say what is expected. They do what is endorsed. Their smiles are rehearsed, their beliefs borrowed. They've mastered the art of survival, but forgotten the art of living. And often they become the very ones who police others. They mock the honest, silence the different, shame the bold. Because deep down, your truth threatens their illusion. Conformity is not just about behavior, it's about erasure. The erasure of nuance, of raw emotion, of personal vision. The more you blend in, the more the sharp edges of your individuality are dulled. And what remains is not a person, but a product of social engineering. Easy to manage, easy to like, easy to forget. But every lie you tell to belong becomes a wound, and one day your body remembers what your mind denied. The anxiety, the fatigue, the silent grief. They are not signs of weakness. They are symptoms of a soul denied expression. You may not realize it, but part of you is already trying to break free. To remove the mask is terrifying. You risk being called selfish, difficult, arrogant. You may lose friends, respect, comfort. But what you gain is something far more precious. A life that belongs to you. Not curated for applause, but carved from truth. And once you taste that authenticity, no amount of acceptance can compare. Because nothing is lonelier than being surrounded by people who love a version of you that doesn't exist. There comes a moment in every life when obedience begins to fracture. It may arrive quietly, like a whisper you can't unhear, or it may crash into your world with the force of a sudden realization that you've been living someone else's life. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as the first no you say that feels true. That one word, no, can be a revolution. A single refusal can unravel years of silent conformity. And when it happens, the reaction is swift. You may feel a sudden chill in the room. People who once praised you now glare. They call you ungrateful, rebellious, distant. But what they really mean is this: you stopped playing the part I gave you. This is the first betrayal, not of them, but of the false self you upheld. And it hurts. Not because it's wrong, but because you've spent so long trying to be good in a system that rewards obedience. You feel guilt, fear, confusion. You question yourself. Maybe you are the problem. Maybe they're right. But deep down, another voice rises, steady, stubborn, alive. That voice is your own. It's in this moment that you face the true nature of freedom. It doesn't arrive wrapped in celebration. It shows up as conflict. Saying no to the herd isn't just a statement, it's a fracture. It reveals who around you was truly connected to your essence and who was attached only to your compliance. You begin to see the difference between genuine connection and transactional loyalty. Often, what we call loyalty is just dependence. And when you withdraw the behavior others depended on, your silence, your agreement, your sacrifice, they panic. Because your refusal forces them to confront a truth they've long buried, that their peace required your suppression, and now you've broken the deal. It's lonely, this early rebellion. Even as it liberates, it isolates. You find yourself in unfamiliar emotional terrain, without the certainty of approval or the warmth of belonging. But within that solitude lies something pure. You no longer move to please. You act from inner clarity. And though it costs you the comfort of the herd, it returns to you the compass of your soul. This is not arrogance, it's not selfishness, it's self-respect. And it is the first real act of creation, where you begin not just to live, but to author your existence. That first no echoes far beyond the moment. It says, I will not live half a life to keep others comfortable. I would rather be misunderstood for who I am than loved for who I'm not. And once spoken, it cannot be unspoken. When you first break from the crowd, the silence is disorienting. It arrives not as peace, but as an unsettling quiet, a silence that hums with discomfort, a void that echoes every doubt you tried to bury. The phone doesn't ring as often. Invitations grow sparse. Conversations become awkward or vanish altogether. You're not being punished exactly, but you're no longer useful in the way you were. What's hard to accept is that this silence isn't an accident. It's part of the process. When you remove the mask, people no longer know how to speak to you. You become unfamiliar, even threatening, not by malice, but by your refusal to continue the old charade. The isolation that follows is not only social, but spiritual. The world feels foreign. You feel untethered. Everything you thought was stable begins to blur. But in that silence, something rare happens. The constant background noise, the opinions, the judgments, the suggestions fades. And beneath it, you begin to hear a quieter voice. It doesn't demand, it doesn't flatter. It simply exists, honest, uncertain, yours. This is the beginning of inner clarity. But it doesn't come with comfort, it comes with exposure. Solitude is not romantic in the way books pretend. It is raw. It strips away distraction. There is no one to validate you, no audience to perform for. There is only your mind and the landscape of everything you've avoided. That's why many flee back to the herd. It offers noise to drown in. But if you stay, if you endure the starkness, you begin to see. In the desert of solitude, your patterns rise like mirages. You notice how much of your life was reaction, how many choices were never truly yours. And though it's painful, it's also necessary, because only by sitting with yourself can you begin to distinguish your voice from the echoes of others. This is where healing starts, not by fixing, but by finally listening. The silence reshapes you. Slowly, you stop looking for validation in the eyes of others. You stop adjusting your posture to be seen. You begin to choose differently, not out of rebellion, but out of alignment. And in time, the solitude becomes something else. Not a punishment, but a sanctuary. A place where you don't need to explain your existence. This is the rite of passage no one talks about. It doesn't come with rituals or applause, but it marks the beginning of selfhood. You stop being a reflection and become a presence. And when you re-enter the world, you walk differently, not with arrogance, but with gravity. Because the silence has shown you that you are enough without being understood. You will feel it in the smallest glances, in the sudden distance of once close friends, in the awkward silences that used to be filled with laughter. The world you left behind won't chase you. It will quietly close the door behind you. At first, you'll wonder what you did wrong. You'll replay conversations, look for mistakes, try to repair what can't be mended. But eventually, it dawns on you. It's not that you hurt them. It's that you no longer play your role. The rejection you feel isn't really about you. It's about the discomfort your transformation creates. You're no longer convenient. You don't say what they expect. You don't nod at the right times. Your presence becomes a mirror, and in it, they see everything they've avoided. That's what resentment feeds on, not your actions, but the reminder that change is possible, and they chose not to. And yet, they rarely admit this. Instead, they frame their distance as concern. They'll say you've changed too much, that you're difficult, that you've lost yourself. But listen closely, and you'll hear what they're really saying. You stopped making me comfortable. Resentment wears 1,000 masks: concern, judgment, advice. But at its root, it is envy in denial. The herd rarely attacks directly. It hints, it suggests, it plants doubts. It hopes you'll tire of the silence, of the cold shoulders, of the passive resistance, and return. Not because it wants you whole, but because it wants you predictable again. The pain of rejection cuts deepest when it comes from those you love. When family questions your sanity, when old friends treat your growth as betrayal, when the people you once trusted begin to speak of you as if you're lost. But they're not really angry at you. They're mourning the version of you that made them feel safe. Recognizing this changes everything. You stop taking the rejection personally. You see it as a symptom of the system you stepped out of. And though it still hurts, it no longer confuses you. Their discomfort is not your failure. It's confirmation that you're no longer imprisoned by their expectations. Your freedom threatens those who remain chained, and sometimes their resentment will be the clearest sign that you're finally walking your own path. When you step away from the herd, you don't just lose direction. You lose the map itself. Everything that once guided you becomes irrelevant. What's admirable? What's shameful? What's successful? These questions used to have answers. Now they only echo. This is where the deeper challenge begins, not just to walk alone, but to define what walking even means. Outside the rules of collective life, you must begin to shape your own compass. But that doesn't mean anything goes. It means you no longer inherit values. You forge them. Most people assume ethics is about right and wrong, but ask them why something is right, and they freeze. They quote rules, cite tradition, repeat slogans, but they rarely speak from lived conviction, because conviction requires reflection. And the herd discourages reflection. It delays action and breeds doubt. But now there's no one to obey, no one to blame. You must decide what matters to me. What am I willing to suffer for? What does it mean to live with integrity? These aren't abstract questions. They become the foundation for every choice you make. And the answers won't come from books. They will come from mistakes, from bruises, from moments when you choose against comfort. This ethical recreation is not glamorous. It means losing the applause that comes with conformity. It means sometimes disappointing others. But it also means living without the low-grade guilt that comes from betraying yourself. It means knowing why you act, not because someone told you to, but because it feels true. You begin to act not for appearances, but for alignment. And slowly, your decisions start to reflect who you are, not who you were told to be. You stop asking what's allowed and start asking what's honest. And in this, you grow, not upward toward approval, but inward toward coherence. The new compass doesn't point north, it points inward. Freedom sounds beautiful in theory. It's easy to romanticize. Open fields, bold choices, a life without limits. But few speak of its gravity, because when you are truly free, there is no one left to blame. Every choice, every mistake, every silence becomes yours. The herd gives you something subtle but powerful, an alibi. If things go wrong, it's the system, it's the rule, it's what everyone else does. But outside the herd, failure isn't shared, it's yours. And that realization is both terrifying and empowering. You become the sole author of your life, and also its sole critic. There is no applause in this freedom. No one thanks you for walking your own path. In fact, many resent it. You no longer receive the comfort of agreement, the warmth of consensus. Instead, you face a colder truth. You must live with the outcomes of your choices, good or bad. This weight is why many turn back. Not because they prefer captivity, but because the silence of responsibility is deafening. When no one is telling you what to do, the burden of doing anything becomes immense. Each step feels like a risk, but within that risk lies power. You begin to move not out of obligation, but from choice. And that shift, though subtle, is transformative. You take ownership of your time, your voice, your energy. You say yes and no without needing a reason. You start to trust your instincts, not because they're perfect, but because they're yours. And slowly you discover something extraordinary. The fear of failure fades. Because failure, when owned fully, becomes information, not condemnation, not shame, just truth. You learn, you adjust, you continue. This is what freedom demands, not recklessness but responsibility, not rebellion for its own sake, but alignment without apology. You become less concerned with what others think and more focused on whether you can stand behind your own decisions. And that is the quiet power of freedom. Not that it removes pain, but that it makes it meaningful. You suffer less from confusion and more from effort. But that effort is honest. It is yours, and in time that becomes enough. There comes a point when silence no longer frightens you, when being misunderstood stops feeling like failure, when you realize that the ones who mock your path never dared to question theirs. The world will always prefer obedience over originality, comfort over courage. But the moment you cease to ask for permission, the moment you no longer wait for the world to understand, you step into a different kind of existence. One without a manual, without applause, without a finish line, but also one where every choice is yours, every misstep a lesson, every scar a signature. You are no longer a follower of maps drawn by fearful hands. You become the cartographer, and in that quiet, defiant act of drawing your own path, you become free, not in name, but in essence. The herd may never applaud your solitude, but it was never applause you were seeking. It was the truth of who you are, and that, at last, is enough.